Well, thank you for that. So it was on one battlefield called the Texas Tribune where a lot of this, thinking started. I'm an addicted entrepreneur and I love solving really big problems. I didn't quite know what I was getting into when I decided to join the Texas Tribune to help them launch the site. That was simply the limit of my obligations, and I ended up there, I think, about another 18 months. And it was with that that I realized that despite our success, and despite being very technologically focused, we literally had no idea who our audience was beyond some simple surveys that, embarrassingly, we would run maybe every year, and some very, sort of questionable quantitative analytics, a lot self-reported, Google Analytics, Omniture, some services out there like Quantcast or ComScore that thought they had an idea of what our traffic was like. But nobody could really tell us who our audience was at scale without the intervention of questions to interrupt our users or anything else. So once I knew that Texas Tribune was going to be off to the races, I decided to move on to try to solve this problem. And I think 3 years ago, this was, somewhat of a new concept, but I think today we're all having a major data awakening. We're all realizing how much data we're all creating. If you could actually see it, we're all evaporating data as we speak. Companies are generating massive amounts of information. And this sounds like a brochure, but I think the real reason they call it big data is simply because it's piling up. And so what do you do with all of this data? And maybe more importantly, who are the rights holders for this data? Like, who owns this data? Who should benefit from it? And I think in the media context, something went very wrong in the early days of the transition to digital. We often criticize the traditional media companies for what they do, but they actually have storytellers beyond just editorial. They have sales teams who tell stories about their audience. The tools we still, I think, like to criticize, like the Nielsen's and the Arbitrons, those techniques may be hundreds of years old, but they tell a story about who the audience is. And that is really valuable. And when we moved to digital, I think we outsourced everything to Google. And now there's thousands of companies that are fighting sort of for those incremental CPM improvements. And sadly, they know that your audience better than you do. And that doesn't make much sense. The relationship that matters is the one between you and your reader, the one between you and your consumer. And if you do it ethically and you respect the relationship, there's a lot of data there that can help you tell stories about the value of the audience. So while I totally respect the idea of journalism and content being king, your ability to articulate the value of that audience to a particular sponsor is also critically important. And I think, it's simple to say, hey, you should get hold of your data and figure it out. But how many in this room have data scientists, analysts, or storytellers devoted to telling data-driven stories to brands and agencies to make you more money? It's crazy. We're full of some of the world's best storytellers, but we don't apply those same talents to the data. But getting to that data, and I think what the Media Impact Project is doing and others is hard. So if you think of a modern media stack, it's full of all kinds of complex components, massive investments. You have DMPs and you have ad servers, you have social channels. Trying to make sense of social ROI is really, really difficult. How hard is it to get access to your developers? Probably pretty hard. How many of you think of yourselves as media technology companies and not just editorial, endeavors? So making sense of all of this data, breaking the technology silos, and more importantly, breaking the organizational silos is really, really hard. And so I think, in the end, digital media companies are not taking advantage of this data asset. We're starting to work more and more with some of the world's biggest broadcasters, and, taking advantage of these innovations is difficult. Showing the impact of their investment to a sponsor is very difficult. But it's something that everybody must do. I would assert that in the next 3 to 5 years, data will start to move from the intangible side of a balance sheet to the tangible side of the balance sheet. This is going to be a mandate from the top down in these companies to take a hold of this data, figure out what it's worth and how you can make it more valuable. The CMOs today still, get by with impressions and conversions, but who cares how many times that ad was seen? I think even today I hear constantly that size equals value, and all of these media companies out here are racing to get more uniques and more traffic. But what if you have the most interesting audience in the world and you can articulate that to a sponsor who's really willing to pay money for that? That might mitigate the idea that you have to grow a giant audience, and might help, focus where you really need to focus. So I think Umbel's vision and the opportunity for everyone in this room is to make data the most valuable asset that you own. And I say that right now from a pure media company standpoint, but this really applies to companies. And maybe at the end of the day, if we do our job correctly, it applies to individuals. I think we as individuals are in control of most of this data, but we're the furthest from being able to actually realize that control. So Umbel hopefully will someday help each and every one of us make more sense and understand and not be, confused about the value of our own data. So just in summary, stop focusing on ad networks, figure out how to get those, premium dollars, devote some of your storytelling efforts to better monetizing your digital assets. I think eliminate company fragmentation. I think I love what NPR is doing. Make everyone in your company aware, democratize the data, help everyone understand the impact of the stories they're writing and the advertisers that they're bringing on. And I think to the data rights subject, respect your users. Be transparent, give them options, let them opt out. Don't be embarrassed to ask them for more data, but be willing to let them opt out of it if they want to. So hopefully the internet will be a wonderful place for all of us in the future, and I think media companies have a chance to take back what brands and agencies took from them in this transition to digital, and I think data is sort of the key. So thank you.